Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk to you today about what I've built at Adobe, and that's the Hive. A little bit about the Hive. It is a collaboration and acceleration practice, and I lead the Hive as well as the accelerated innovation and design capability for Adobe. A little bit about myself. I approach this world, as you heard from Heather, in a little bit of a different way. Beyond just coming from marketing and more traditional business, I also have a degree in ecology, which means that I approach the intersection of design and business more as an ecologist than a technologist. I tend to look at the system rather than the individual group or relationship. And so that means that I tend to look across many different things and see how small changes can have a really big influence across the company. So the Hive is an internal collaboration capability. We are a consulting capability, and we accelerate customer centricity through effective collaboration. Before I get into what we do and how we do it, I just want to ask everyone a question. How many times have you left a cross-functional workshop or meeting, you've made all of the great decisions, you're feeling over the moon, you've had alignment on your service blueprint or your customer journey map, and now you've set off on the work streams and everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to do, only to come back 2 weeks or a month later and realize that everyone had a different view of success. You've actually been building something completely different. You've gone to your leaders, you've pitched them your vision, and everyone comes back together, you've all built something different, you may not have even been building for the same user or persona, and everyone digs in because their leaders believe what they've told them. And now you have a real problem because you're not at square one. You're actually at square zero because people have lost faith in the process and everything you've done, and they've lost trust in one another. At the Hive, we inspire people to work differently. We teach teams to build the foundation to get the right work done and the relationships to sustain momentum after. We do this through specialized facilitation that accelerates the strategic work of Adobe and execute our top priorities. We do that through a team, space, and methodology. The team is quite small. We are very cross-functional. We come from very different backgrounds. The space is pictured in this picture here. It does have 2 full stories of windows and has been purpose-built to deliver collaboration and to enable people to think differently. And then there's our methodology, which is a true mix of different methodologies. And we change what we do based on the team and their level of maturity and willingness for change. One thing that's really important to us is scope. So our sessions are typically 1 day, 25 people or less, in our dedicated space with 2 facilitators. There's a very specific reason behind this that I'll get to later. But what that means is that we have very restrained view of what we can deliver again and again. Excuse me. We've delivered over 60 sessions. 9 out of 10 people refer us to their peers. And very importantly, we've saved an average of 2 to 3 months per session, and that's as reported from our clients. At this point, you're probably asking yourself, so the Hive delivers workshops. What's so great about that? We all deliver workshops. Yes, and the sessions are the catalyst for culture change. They enable us to inculcate people into our way of working. They enable us to show people rather than tell them how to work differently. They enable us to show them exactly how they should work differently because they're doing the work, not us. We're not doing the work for them. They're doing the work. We're just guiding them through the container. It also enables change makers and leaders to take risks, to build something different, and to learn how to actually do it again and again. And this is a quote, and the next few quotes are actually from our session owners. In this one, the team had 88 priorities across 3 different business units, and they had no way to know what they should deliver to anyone. So they got the 3 leaders together, as well as their chief delegates, and had conversations. They put faces behind the spreadsheets. They talked about the trade-offs, and ultimately the team went from 88 to just 8 priorities. And the best part was that they didn't need us the next year to lead the session. They did it on their own. Often people come to us and they want to do many things. They want to define a vision, a strategy, requirements. They want to do it all in 1 day. And because we have a very clear scope, we can easily tell them they can't do that. It's impossible. And so what that means is that we can push work before or after the session. We can change the work that gets done based on what they do ahead and after. That means that the teams can actually choose what they want to get done, what they want to accelerate. And because they own everything, they own the pre-work as well as the post-work. When you bring customers into the room, it changes everything. It's no different here. This quote came from a customer journey mapping session where product leaders had to listen to a fishbowl of customers talking about their products. And this is what one of the product managers said. It felt like open heart surgery to hear his customers talking about his product and not be able to respond. This empathy lasted not just throughout the session, but well beyond. This came from a former session owner wanting to be Hive certified. We don't even have a certification, but she wanted her entire team to be certified in what we do because of the value she felt a year after her session. Last, this is one of my favorites, and it has been for quite a while. The Hive is where you go to be surprised. And that's not talking about our session experience, which people do tend to like. It's talking about the fact that you can't come in with a preconceived notion and leave with that same notion. It's saying that the outcomes and the outputs are going to be different because of the experience you have and how you collaborate with your colleagues. And so from that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how we do it. Very importantly, I approach everything, and my team does, with a culture change mindset. That means that we build alliances. We, yes, give it away. We're patient, and we also ship our ideas. These 4 things work together. Building alliances is critical because culture change isn't an individual sport. It's not something that you can do in your innovation or design silo. Giving it away, this is really uncomfortable for many designers because it means that someone might be able to do something as well as us, or that they're really probably going to do it wrong. And it's really challenging when you're building something with intent to think that you're going to actually let other people use it. But what I found as people hacked our tools is that if we didn't give it away, if we were too precious, then we were the ones losing. If people wanted to use it, it meant that they felt it was meaningful and important to their work. For anyone who builds with large companies or works inside one, you know that things move slow, often slower than we might want. And so you have to be patient, but that goes along with shipping your ideas. Because if you don't show business value, you aren't going to build trust within the business. And so you have to be patient, but you also have to ship enough and quickly enough that it's meaningful. And it's really important to remember that effective pilots, effective experiments don't have to be expensive or take a long time or be perfect. Next for us, we have to make sure our sessions live beyond a day. What that means is that we have a series of what we call design meetings. These design meetings involve a subset of the participants. The design meetings typically have a group of people working together, aligning ahead of time, building relationships, and asking each other and their leaders the hard questions before we get into a session. Next is executive sponsorship. Every session has VP or above executive sponsorship. That's so that as strategic priorities change, we're able to flex with that, and the leaders know the work that's coming. Also, it gives visibility for the teams and the work they're doing, as well as the Hive itself. Last is relationships. Partially because of the design meetings and partially because of the day together, people build relationships that last much longer than a day. And that ensures that when they leave, they actually can continue collaborating. They already know how to do it because they've worked differently together. Quick thing about our process, there's much more focus on getting to the session than the session itself. And that can be a little bit misleading when we talk about these great sessions and the outputs we have and the impact they have, because that session is just a day, and we do have a very short tail after where we work with teams to make sure they have everything they need. Where all of the magic happens is in that 3 to 8 weeks, because that's where we're able to help the teams learn how to work differently and build the relationships that last after. Every session begins with an ask. We do ask people to apply, and then we approve it. We have a governance model, and we make sure that their individual work fits within something that we can do, that it's fit for a Hive. We then head into a session owner briefing. This enables us to understand the problem from the session owner's point of view. Typically, it's not the right problem to solve. We have some work to go from there. So then we head into stakeholder interviews. The stakeholder interviews could be ecosystem interviews, they could be customer interviews, they might even be with the design team if it's particularly cross-functional. That helps us to understand the motivations. The first design meeting is all about setting the objectives, the outputs, and the outcomes. These three words are integral to everything that we do. The objectives help us tell the goals of the session. The outputs help us tell the tangible artifacts we want to walk away with. And the outcomes are all about the intangible, the way we want people to feel. And these all are explicitly stated and iterated throughout the whole thing. The next design meeting is all about thinking about the agenda, what we're going to do, the inputs that are required. We find out what people are building. Then we talk about the actual work. That's where our methodology comes in. From there, the walkthrough is all about taking people through the experience. It's prototyping the experience so that teams know what to expect when they become participants. And then we head into the session, and then of course we do have that little bit of time after. Something that's really important to note about our methodology. It is a true mix of things. It's not one service design methodology. It's not any one thing. It's a mix, and that's because the teams we deal with and work with tend to have a big range of understanding of their customers. The challenges are really diverse, and the teams have a different willingness to change. And so we have to provide them something different depending on their flexibility and where they are. We want to meet them where they are so they can actually adopt these tools when they leave. Getting to slow hunches. So something that is really interesting about building in a large organization, and those of you who are in large organizations know this, and government I think is probably similar, is that you have to build one thing on top of another. And when I think about slow hunches, probably partly because of my background, I think about Stephen Johnson. And I think about the idea that evolution and innovation thrive in collaborative networks. And the idea that discoveries evolve over time, and they build on one another and connect. Very rarely do you have that big bang where it's perfect right out of the gate. And so not only can you see how we help teams to build slow hunches, it's also how the Hive was built. It really did start with an idea. Through our transition from box software to software as a service, we had to make a lot of changes at Adobe. It was huge. We were a complete product company that suddenly had to deliver services. The whole back end was different. Teams across the company really had to change. In that transition, we used accelerated solution design, or environments, depending on where you come from, which is a classic management consulting practice. And you typically bring together large groups of people over a number of days to make really big decisions. These were typically 50 to 90 people in 3 to 5 days, and really big decisions were made. One of the leaders that attended many of those felt like this way of working should be something that Adobe did. We were getting all the outputs and the outcomes that we wanted, but she actually had a hunch that this way of working could change the way Adobe worked. And so she set out to have a very small pilot. She did this entirely with consultants so that if it failed, it was very easy to roll back. There would be no headcount. It would be easy to just kind of erase. She owned a particular group within the organization that was a new service lifecycle group that managed all of the projects. Within that, she had the opportunity to accelerate those particular projects that she felt like was most important. So she had a purview across the whole company. This team also decided to squat on a space, which is really critical. And after just 2 months, the pilot was really successful. And that's when I was brought in to decide if we should build or buy this. Should we continue using the consultants to scale, or should we build something specifically for Adobe? A few months after working, I realized the consultants' accelerated solution design didn't fit the level of detail and the range of problems that I saw coming in. It was sort of like we kept throwing the same shape at something when different shapes were coming in. And my background in design consulting let me know there was a whole bunch of other tools that weren't being used and that the consultants didn't have the right skills to do. So at that point, we decided to build it. Really important, though, was that we needed to rebrand it. Something that's interesting about slow hunches is you can change some things and you can't change others. The name stuck. We have never been able to rebrand the name, so be careful what you name things early on. The other thing is that we were able to keep the space. At the point where we were building and went from squatting the space to owning it, the company had grown immensely. It took Adobe 30 years to get to 9,000 and just 6 years to get to over 20. There was no space. If we had tried to find the space 2 years later, or even a year later, we never would have gotten it. And so we went from squatting to owning the space, which is integral to what we do. At that point, we bought in new tools and new technologies. We were able to, redo the space a little bit. We created a brand that fit within the Adobe brand rather than feeling like the consultants. We were lucky enough about a year ago to become the Customer Experience Hive. What that meant is that we had even more of a brand right to put customers at the center of our work, to ask team different questions, and to really change the way we work. This also added a whole new set of methodologies, for those you know, which was an interesting additional challenge. It also meant that we were closer to the product. We were closer to the product teams. And now we're at the point that we need to scale skills. And this is because our sessions are increasingly at the C-suite level. 2 of our last 5 sessions have been for leaders. The executive sponsors have actually been the chief product officer and the chief financial officer, which means other teams need what we do. They need to be able to have these skills, and we can't supply all of them with the information and the facilitation. So we had a choice. Do we scale the team? Do we become a large team that does this? And the decision was no, that we should actually scale what we do to other people so they can do it, rather than relying on facilitators to do it for them. That's where we are today. This is a nice, linear, clean story, and it never works like this, as you all know. This is what it actually felt and still sometimes feels like. You're navigating muddy waters. The rapids that you're prepared for aren't the ones that knock you out of the boat. It's kind of cold. You have to rely on your team. And ultimately, you are going to have a really, really good time. And that's what we do. So some of the challenges that we've met over the time has been sponsorship. As I mentioned, we became the CX Hive, the Customer Experience Hive. That meant a change in ops staff leader. That meant a slight change in priorities. We've always had support for what we do. It's just some of our ways that we do it and the priorities that we have did change. The second is balance. It's very hard to balance building your practice, building a methodology, and delivering value and business value to teams. That's something we still struggle with. Next is surprises. This could be as simple as, oh, the executive sponsor quit the night before the session. That has happened. Or it can be something as big as the team isn't doing their work. They aren't actually owning the session the way they need to. And at that point, we actually had to make a really hard decision. We had to decide to cancel the session. And we had to change our governance to let teams know they are responsible for the success of the session, not us. We provide the container, they provide the inputs, the people, and that's critical to the success and the viability of everything that we do. The last thing is hackers. We had people stealing our decks and manipulating them and going in and changing things. And that was really hard. It felt like they were stealing things that we had built, and it felt really personal. And there had to be a decision that we had to let people use what we built. But in order to do that, we also had to provide them the coaching and the guidelines and the mechanisms to do it well. And so that's where we are today. I encourage people to hack what we're doing. I just want to provide them the guardrails to do it well and make sure that they're using what we do correctly. This is all great, but I think the best part is, as an intrapreneur, you're able to do different things than if you live SOW to SOW. So I want to talk to you about the impact of intrapreneurship. From those of you working in the government or inside of companies, you know it's different to be an external consultant versus an internal person. You have a different level of speed. You're required to do things just a little bit differently. To me, that's really exciting. It's why I left consulting and came back in-house, because I wanted to actually be able to influence teams over a longer period of time. And I had the opportunity to do that. I had the opportunity to do that because we can incubate ideas through the Hive. We can see interesting work coming in that isn't fully fleshed out. One of those that came in was Lab 82. Lab 82 is a collaboration between the Hive team, collaborative technology, and the Employee Workplace Strategy Group. It's a physical space outside of the Hive. It looks a little bit similar, but it's completely separate. It's a non-managed room, it's open to everyone, and it's a really unique place where we are able to actually prototype space. It's a physical prototyping space used to test technology, ways of working, furniture, and space. On the outside, there's a quote from our founders that great ideas come from everywhere. Our goal was to decentralize these collaborative spaces and allow people to use them however they wanted to and to see what happened. But the teams we were working with, that we were collaborating with, also needed ways to test what they were building, to test the spaces they were building across Adobe. We're building spaces worldwide, and much of that testing was being done behind closed doors before this project. So this also started as a slow hunch. It started as an idea, as a conversation, a casual collision. Someone was struggling, they needed to be thinking about Adobe 2025, their leaders weren't really buying into it, and they needed to get people together. That led to a 25-person cross-functional Hive with thought leaders from across the company, as well as thought leaders from outside of the company, because we didn't have the answers. We needed people to help us know what 2025 would look and feel like. The problem was what came out of that session, it was like an infant. It wasn't fully formed. It wasn't ready to be released into the corporate world and have the antibodies jump on it and destroy it. It needed to be fostered. It needed to be incubated. And so at that point, we started leading a Tiger team. And the Tiger team helped us define design principles. It helped to define a vision, core ways of working to be tested. It got executive sponsorship across all of the different groups that were involved. And what that meant is that it had visibility. We were able to really build something and begin designing it in a way that was meaningful for the company, but also was a collaboration. The team stayed together in that cross-functional group. And that led to now we're on version 3. We're designing version 3 because we've already had 2 iterations. And these iterations are full-scale changes. We've changed carpeting, lighting, technology, all of the furniture. We've changed facilitation tools in there. And this is a space where people come in and they're told this isn't gonna look like what you did in here the last time. This isn't gonna feel the same way. So they're ready to have that change happen, and they're still booking it at really, really high clips, and that's great, because it means that they're willing to go along on the journey with us. This is all great, but the real change is that the team is still collaborative. We still have a mix of these folks as well as extended customer experience CX team folks. There's been an adoption of design mentality and new full-time people added to the other team so that we don't have to be the only ones thinking this way. There's been a high ROI on the prototyping model. In one instance, a prototype and a test of a digital whiteboard that the team was sure, they were confident it was gonna be perfect and roll out, proved in 2 months it was a complete failure. Without this, they would have rolled out 25 to 50 of these units globally, and they would have never been used. The team would have been frustrated, we would have spent a ton of money. The last thing is that the wins are rolled out globally. So we have an opportunity to impact the way Bangalore offices are built, in Tokyo and Dublin, because we're able to change the way that people work and the way they collaborate and the spaces and the technology and the facilitation tools provided to them. So with that, I want to talk about integrating. You're hearing so many things at this conference. Many of you do work similar to this. And so I'm hoping that you can integrate just a couple of things from this talk into the work that you do. First, harness your culture. These 3 things enabled us to harness Adobe's culture. We're highly matrixed, which means people have to collaborate to get any important work done. You're working across a matrix always. It's a fairly creative culture, which means that people are willing and open to get up to the whiteboard and draw and to be silly and to shake it out and to do things they wouldn't normally do. The last thing is that we are quite solution focused. We spent decades as a product company shipping box products, which means that we tend to jump to the answer rather than spending time to come up with an idea and ideate on it and grow from there. So I'm gonna ask you, what parts of your culture are you gonna harness for your clients? what parts of their culture? If you're internal, what parts of the culture inside? And the last thing is, as you build, remember to keep these 6 things in mind. Nurture your slow hunches. Don't try to do it in one big bang where you're rolling out the greatest thing ever, because it won't be. Test it with real people, build as you go. The next is to build allies. This is so important because if you don't have other people on the ship with you, you're not going to be successful. You need to have people outside of your groups to buy into what you're doing. Last is be a mixologist. You can't imagine just one methodology. That might be the core, but you might need to meet people in the middle in order to have it really resonate with them. Number 4 is give it away. And I know this was talked about last year. It's also something that as we get farther and farther into organizations and new fiefdoms start, we have to think about giving it away and also what we're going to take away from those other practices. Leverage existing processes. This is something that I haven't talked a ton about, but it's something that we've done explicitly with the Hive. Processes that exist in your companies or within the governments that you work in are critical to be able to actually move the needle. If you aren't thinking about what's already being done and you're trying to add something on, it's just one more thing to do. If you integrate it into what's already being done, you have the opportunity to jump on to success. You have the opportunity to build momentum, to actually change the way people think. And maybe it's just one touch point along that process. But if you can impact the right one early enough, you can have a really big change downstream. The last is make progress and iterate. It's something that we teach our clients, but it's also something that is essential in what you build. You have to change what you build over time. Nothing is going to be perfect when it comes out of the gate. So change it. Thank you very much.